Welcome to the second video tutorial for the iPad Assessor application. In this video we're going to concentrate on how we identify hazards and assess risks using the iPad Assessor application. This diagram just shows the process overview of the application. So by now you should have installed the app. In the previous video we looked at the pre-assessment process. We're now going to start looking at stage 3, the assessment, and specifically in this video hazard identification and risk assessment. So once again we start by opening the Assessor application by clicking on the Assessor icon, and that'll take us to the splash screen of the application. We can go through to our council area that we've entered before. So I'll just go through to test council. We can go through to the assessment, which we had as initial assessment, and the beach, which is Bondi. That then brings up a screen with our audit options. So we've got hazards, accesses, facilities, rescue equipment, services and service levels. In this video we're going to look at the hazard screen. So I just click on the hazard screen, but before I do I'll just explain to you on each of those menu items down the right hand side is a number. Now at the moment, because we haven't entered anything in, they're all showing 0, but for each item we add in, it'll add 1 to the count, and it'll show you how many hazards you've identified, or accesses, or facilities, and so on and so forth. So we'll click on the hazard menu item, and that takes us through to the hazard screen. At the moment we haven't added anything in, so we've just got the splash screen, but at the top left hand corner it shows us that we're in the hazards part of the application, because we've got the hazards button there. We can always tell where we are within the application by looking at the name that's displayed on that button. Now to add a new hazard, I click that button and I click the edit button, and that brings up the add hazard option. To add a hazard I then click the plus button, and that brings up a list of all the preloaded hazards that we've already identified as options for you to consider. But you may also want to add in ones that aren't listed there, and if you want to do that, the way you do that is you hit the edit button and you go down to the bottom and you'll see the add new item option. If I click the plus button, I then get a hazard type window up here, and I just want to, if I want to add a new hazard in there, I just type a title for that hazard. So I'll just type in new hazard item, and then I click done and done again to get rid of the edit features of the menu. And now I have, it's in alphabetical order, so if I go to N, I've got new hazard item, and that's forever going to appear in this menu. I'll never have to type that item again, and that's always there. Now if I want to get rid of it because I'm not using it or I made a mistake, I click edit again, and then the minus buttons appear. I click the minus button and that brings up the delete feature. I hit delete and now that's gone. When I click done, I get rid of the edit features of the menu, and I'm back to where we started. So to get into the hazard identification and assessment screen, I first have to choose a hazard. Now I'm going to choose shallow sandbanks under S. There it is, shallow sandbanks, and I select it by touching that menu item, and that goes into the hazard menu. I hit done to get rid of the minus buttons, and then we're good to go. If I want to go back now, if I hit audits to get back to the screen before, I can now see that there's a 1 next to the hazards option. So I go back into hazards where shallow sandbanks is, and now I click shallow sandbanks, and that brings up the hazard identification and assessment screen. Now on the screen we can see we've got a GPS reference, and the plus or minus 10 next to it, which is showing on mine, is the accuracy that we're getting from the GPS location. So we usually want that to be within 5 meters. If we're in an outside location, then obviously the accuracy is going to be better. Underneath that we've got risks, risk groups, and then our risk rating, the risk score, existing controls, so what's already in place, and the controls that we're recommending. And then we can add a photo, either by using the camera that's on the iPad or by attaching a photo out of our photo library. Now we'll start with the GPS location. There's 2 ways of doing it. We can either mark it, so if we're getting a reading that's fairly accurate, so plus or minus 5 meters, we may wish to just use the mark button, and that'll just lock those coordinates in place and store them in the database. If we're getting a reading that's less accurate, so plus or minus 10 or plus or minus 20 meters, we may wish to just validate that by looking at the map and seeing where we're locating it. So we do that by hitting the drop pin button, and that'll bring up a map. Now this is showing me that I'm in Rosebery because that's where I am at the moment, but if I wanted to relocate that to, say, Bondi Beach, then I can tap the pin, tap it once, and that'll bring up that drag me window. If I tap the pin again, it'll lift off the screen, and I can drag it to a new location and drop it in. If I then pinch out, I can zoom in by pinching out, and I may wish to change it to the satellite view, and we can zoom in a bit more and drag it again to where a shallow sandbank is. Oh, not quite there. Say in there, and once I'm happy, I hit done, and then you'll see that the a darker version of the coordinates is now stored. That means those coordinates are locked in place and they won't move even if you walk away. So that's what we want to see. So the next thing we do is add risks. So we do that by hitting the plus button next to where it says add risk, and that'll bring up a list of predefined risks that we've identified. You can select as many of those as you want, so I might select spinal injury, head injury, major hospitalisation, minor injury first aid, but I might also identify one that's not in that list, and the way we add that in is the same way we do with every menu in the application. We hit the edit button, and at the bottom we've got add new item. So at the moment, because I'm at the bottom of the screen, I'm not able to get there, so I'll just click outside of that, and I might scroll the window up a little bit and then try and do it again. So add new risk, edit, and then I've got a bit more space so I can access that add new item. So I'll click add new item, and I'll type in new risk and hit done. Done again. Now there's new risk, it's now part of that menu. If I want to leave it there, I'll never have to type new risk again. If I want to delete it, I just hit edit, hit the minus button and hit delete, and it's gone. So the next thing on this screen is the risk groups. Now they're the groups that are most at risk from this hazard and are most at risk of being involved in an incident that we've identified with the risks. So we add risk groups by hitting the plus button and choosing those risk groups. These are the ones we've predefined, but you can add new ones in if you wish the same way as we did for risks. So we might say males, swimmers, 24 to 35-year-old males, etc., etc. The next thing down is the risk score. So we've got a current risk score, which is the risk score that we're going to give it for the hazard without risk treatments, as it is now, and then a residual risk score, which is the score that we'll give it after we apply our recommendations. So the current risk score, we click the blue button that brings up the consequence and likelihood matrix, and we just tap the score. So we might go critical, possible, so that gives us high, and when you touch it you can see that it changes colour to let you know which one you've touched, and you hit done, and then that score is set. Now I might want to leave the residual risk score as it is until we go and put in our controls. So initially, the first one we do is the existing controls, and again we've got a list of predefined controls that we've identified, but if you want to add in new ones, just use the edit feature and add new item. So we might say at Bondi we've got paid life-saving services, we've got safety signage, we've got volunteer life-saving services, and there's several others, but we won't do all of them. And then what's different with this menu is that it also gives you a little blue arrow next to it, because what we want to do is rate the existing controls. So if we touch that, we'll get an option for inadequate, poor, moderate, good, or excellent. And so we just rate them based on our experience on how good a job they're doing. Because if things aren't performing well, then we're going to have to change. Then we've got recommended controls. So these are the controls that we're recommending be put in place to try and bring that risk score down to the level that we're identifying in our residual risk. So, and you can put the same things in that are in the existing controls, because in the report you're going to explain in more detail what you mean by these recommendations. So we might put paid life-saving services, we might put, maintained access tracks, we might put safety signage, and we might put public rescue equipment. Now, whenever you add one of these in, it will also need you to add a bit more detail into the report once you finish the assessment, but I'll show you how to do that when we get to the reporting video. The last option is the photo. Now you can use the camera option down here or the camera roll. I'm just going to use the camera roll because I don't want to move the iPad. So then I select the photo, choose that one, hit done, and that's stored. Now you can choose as many photos as you want. You're not limited to one. You can have as many as you want. But that's how we add a hazard. Now when you go back, you can go back to audits. Now you've got the one there against your hazards. If you go back into hazards, when you want to add a new hazard, you just hit edit, add new, and choose a new one. Now the last thing I want to show you is a feature that we added to try and make the assessment process much quicker for you. So once you've added in one hazard, if you want to do another one, say what's similar to shallow sandbanks, we might do dumping ways with similar risks and locations and things like that. Instead of having to re-enter everything, I can just press the copy. So at the top, the hazard menu, when we add a hazard, we've got new, and then there's one for copy. If I hit copy, I get a list of all the hazards that I've already identified. Now to copy it, I just select the shallow sandbanks that we just entered, and it puts a copy of that shallow sandbanks into the hazard menu. I hit done to get rid of the edit feature. Now the one that's a copy is displayed with an asterisk at the start of it. I just select the one with the asterisk, and this is an exact copy, even with the location. The only thing it doesn't have is the photo. So if I want to move this to a new location, I can use the drop the first thing we'll do is change the name. So we don't want it to be shallow sandbanks anymore. We want it to be dumping waves. So I'll use the blue arrow and I'll find D for dumping waves, and there it is. And I change that. Now, then we might want to move the location. So we've got the darkened GPS location there, so we might want to move it to its actual location. So I use the drop pin feature. Or if I'm walking on the beach and I've moved and the accuracy reading is okay, I can just use mark. So I use drop pin. So that's showing me the location that we marked for the shallow sandbanks. Now we might want to put one in for dumping waves. We'll go over here and drop it in there. Hit done, and that's got a new location. If we want to change any of these features, we can. If we want to delete anything, we use the minus button here to bring up the delete feature, and we can change it. But it just means we don't have to go through and add all these new things. We can change the scores if we want. So I hadn't put in the residual risk score before, and I can add a new photo. And we've got a new photo. Hit done, and that's done. Now we've got 2 hazards in there, and so that's how we add new hazards. That's how we copy existing hazards. And that's how we do a hazard identification and risk assessment of the hazards. That's all I'm going to show you in this video. In the other videos, we'll look at the other options there: accesses, facilities, rescue equipment, services, and service levels.